introduction and getting us squared away on housekeeping items. Appreciate that. Good morning. Thank you to all of you for joining in. As you know, today we're going to talk about how to build a winning golden image entry. And as Sheree mentioned, feel free to ask questions as we go along, and of course I'll do my best to field those. Otherwise, you're obviously welcome to wait until the end to pose your question. So let's get started. We were actually asked to speak on this topic because our work with KCCI received the Dick Pope Grandal Image Award last year. So I thought that it might be helpful to just start by briefly profiling that campaign and then get to the meat of things by offering some tips on how to approach your own image entries. The Unite Creative Communities Institute is a community-based nonprofit that contributes to Tallahassee's economic development. They do this by recruiting and organizing local volunteers on an annual basis to spearhead projects that enhance the area's sense of place. And these volunteers are known as community catalysts. So just to give you a few examples, just to give you some context of what they do, one of KCCI's first projects was known as Get Games Going. This group of community catalysts lobbied local government and pulled together a wide range of partners to spur the commercial and residential growth of the Gaines Street corridor. So today, what was once a rundown street lined with old dilapidated buildings is now actually the talk of the town. There's restaurants and shopping, hotels and things like that. And so the Catalyst group really spurred the development, the commercial development of this corridor. KCCI was also responsible for installing a play zone at a new downtown park to help attract families and contribute to the city's vision for an 18-hour downtown. And so you see a picture of that here, the kids playing at a portion of that play space. Another Catalyst group worked to get businesses to sponsor the installation of porch swings like the one you see here in the photo. And these porch swings are placed in various locations throughout the city to offer a taste of the region's southern charm, if you will. And this shows a porch swing out nearby a local lake, but there's actually also one smack in the middle of downtown. So it's kind of a really creative idea to, again, help create a sense of place here in the city. The reason KCCI implements these projects is because Tallahassee has a significant brain drain problem. By that I mean we literally have thousands of creative minds graduate from our local universities and mass exodus our city twice per year, even when jobs are readily available for them here. And this is because research shows that more often than not, people choose where they want to live before applying for a job or choosing where they want to work. Research also shows that in order to attract these bright minds, this driving economic force known as the creative class, in order to attract the creative class, we need to have a distinct sense of place. And that is where KCCI comes in. So this organization is really imperative to advancing our local economy. KCCI came to us in the summer of 2014, I believe it was July, if I remember correctly, at a point where their future was uncertain, to say the least. Their primary source of funding was a 5-year, $560,000 grant from the Knight Foundation, and it was slated to end in November of that year, which would effectively dissolve the organization. In order to prevent that, we were tasked with raising $150,000 to sustain KCCI for another 3 years. They had calculated that's what it would take to keep going. While at the same time, we were also tasked with recruiting the next class of community catalysts to prevent any gap in KCCI's activity and their placemaking initiatives. And of course, we were asked to do this all within a few months' time. So nothing like waiting until the last minute, right? But obviously, we accepted the challenge, and here we are today. And a challenge it was. If raising $150,000 in a couple months' time wasn't enough, we also faced a few complicating factors. For one, KCCI has historically never taken credit for its placemaking projects, and instead they had previously allowed community partners to, quote, own each project and receive the recognition for making it happen. And this humility is actually part of what had made them so successful. The problem now was that while the majority of people knew about KCCI's previous projects, they had no idea that KCCI was the impetus behind them. So we had a bit of a branding issue on our hands, which wasn't helped by its outdated website, which is the last bullet you see there on the slide. In addition, those that knew about KCCI and its work also knew that its grant was expiring and assumed the organization would dissolve. So we had that myth to battle when trying to convince people to apply to become Catalyst. They had just assumed that the organization would dissolve and they wouldn't go through another round of Catalyst recruitment. And lastly, Tallahassee, is not an easy place to raise private dollars. We're not a mecca of large private corporations with deep pockets. Our economy is actually driven by government and education. To complicate that, we also have to contend with the fact that we have more nonprofits per capita here than in any other major metro area in Florida. So what that means is there are a lot of people competing for a very limited amount of private funds in this city. But that didn't stop us. So after considering these challenges and conducting a full SWOT analysis, which we wrote more about in our two-page summary, we developed a strategic communications plan targeting the audiences you see listed here. The KCCI Advisory Board is comprised of highly influential people, business owners, elected officials, and some others with deep and powerful networks that could be leveraged to help spread the word. At the time, KCCI also had more than 150 previous Catalysts or alumni that could serve as excellent ambassadors if only we were to arm them with information and send them on their way. Elected officials were also targeted because we were interested in soliciting some public dollars to fund KCCI's economic development activities. We thought there was that the government had a vested interest in seeing that type of thing come to fruition. Business leaders had another vested interest in seeing KCCI continue because of their need to attract top talent to their companies. I mentioned one of KCCI's primary goals as an organization is to attract and retain members of the creative class. Well, those individuals work for the companies that would employ them. And lastly, we viewed engaged community residents as the pool from which to draw quality Catalyst applications. So reaching each of these audiences was imperative to achieving our objectives, which I've paraphrased here, and you're welcome to read them in full in our two-page summary, which I'd be glad to share with anybody who'd like to receive it. We had two primary objectives and two secondary objectives that really supported the achievement of the first two. Each one was specific in that it stated the exact change desired, contained a measurable criteria, identified a target audience, and gave a deadline. I'll show you an example of that later, but for now, for the sake of brevity, I've kept it short here. Defining clear objectives is imperative to measuring the success of any campaign, and therefore imperative to winning an Image Award, but we'll talk more about that in just a minute. So here are some of the strategies and tactics we employed to achieve those objectives. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, as most of it is pretty standard, and to go through all of it would consume our time. The most important thing to note here, though, is that this campaign on its face wasn't one of those super creative, knock your socks off, never would have thought of that, wild idea types of campaigns. So if you don't have something like that to enter for Image, you don't need to worry about that. This campaign was one of pure substance, where we simply told a story that hadn't been told before in a way that reached and resonated with key audiences and compelled them to act. However, I believe a key reason the campaign was so successful, especially within such a short time frame, is that all of these activities were strategically coordinated. Each and every one of them had a distinct purpose. We did no more and no less than we had to in order to achieve our goal. And all of that was, of course, guided by the strategic communications plan we devised at the forefront of the effort. In addition to that plan making this a seamless process, it also made it much easier to draft our two-page summary for Image Awards and track down all of the supporting documentation. The plan really served as our own little entry roadmap, if you will. So anyway, you see a few of the tactics listed here. We needed a marketing kit, of course, to leave behind with prospective donors and the media. Talking points were developed for the advisory board and KCCI staff on various topics. We held meetings with public officials and business leaders to let them know what was about to happen with the organization. And we coordinated speaking engagements to a couple of dozen community groups across the city, things like Rotary clubs and business organizations and the like. We also researched and worked with KCCI to apply for private grants that might help us achieve that level of funding that we were seeking. And we researched and worked with the KCCI to overhaul their website. I talked about the website being outdated, and there's a before and after picture that we've got. The after picture is a little bit difficult because it's a pretty long scrolling page. It's kind of hard to capture in a screenshot, but there you have it. We also wanted KCCI's brand to be authentic to the region, so we shot new professional photography to go with the website and other marketing materials, of course, too, which really elevated the organization's visual identity. You'd be surprised at just how well professional photographs will do to improve the visual presence of a brand and really give them that credibility that they need. We developed a robust social media strategy complete with a pre-planned content calendar which outlined fun promotions, engaging content, and some cool hashtags and things like that to really get the community involved in what we were doing and what we were saying. We also created some basic print collateral to hand out at meetings and the speaking engagements that I referenced earlier. And we held a celebratory event to announce the continuation of the organization and reveal the new website. So basically, as soon as we knew we were going to hit that $150,000 mark, we planned this event and used that to generate buzz about the Catalyst recruitment process. And I'm sure you know that events are mini PR campaigns in and of themselves, which is why you see a number of sub-tactics related to that initiative here. Of course, we had digital save the dates followed by e-invitations. We're working with a budget here, and we already had a huge email database, and so we just used e-invitations to accomplish getting people to the event. Media relations related to covering the event and what it was about. We had some representations of the placemaking projects there at the event so that people, again, could make that connection between KCCI and the work that it did. We developed a video that showcased some of those past projects and the past successes. And again, we revealed the website at the event as well, just to really get people excited about what was happening and to let them know that KCCI was not going to die, it was going to continue. The bottom line is it worked. And because our original plan contained properly formulated objectives, measurement was easy. We raised $160,000 by September 1st, allowing us to continue with Catalyst recruitment activities and hold that event that I was just taking you through. By December of 2014, we had raised nearly $220,000, which exceeded our original objective by nearly 50%. And believe it or not, donations actually continued to roll in through the first quarter of the new year. We received 46 Quality Catalyst applications by the application deadline, surpassing our original objective by more than 50%. And as of November, the end of November of 2014, we had received 12 news hits across 6 local media outlets, which surpassed our objective by 200%. And if you're at all familiar with the Tallahassee media market, it's actually a pretty huge accomplishment because there's not a lot of opportunities for coverage locally here. And finally, we increased community awareness and interest in KCCI, which was confirmed by a 150% increase in Facebook likes, a 71% increase in Facebook engagement, and a 37% reduction in our website bounce rate after launching the new site, which is a testament to the work we did in getting that site back up to where it needed to be. These metrics were achieved in just 4 months' time, so the campaign was actually pretty darn successful. And that brings me to the first of our 7 secrets to success when it comes to building a successful golden image entry, and that is that it starts with a successful campaign. So I want you to think about all of the projects that you've done over the past year. Think about which were the most well planned, which had a solid research-based foundation, which generated significant results. It's very difficult to make a winning entry out of an okay or a mediocre campaign. You can do it, don't get me wrong, you can do it, but it's going to make your job a whole lot harder. If the project didn't start with a strong research-based foundation, and if you didn't have a plan in place to guide your activities, and if you didn't actually measure and achieve success, then you really shouldn't waste your time trying to make something out of nothing just for the sake of getting an award. Instead, going forward, I would recommend just committing to approaching every new project with the Image Award entry guidelines in mind, so that when the time comes around to enter, it will be pretty obvious as to which of your projects qualifies. That means that each time you begin a new initiative or campaign, start by developing a good grasp of the situation and putting that down in writing. Do your research. Consider your target audiences. Think about how they relate to your broader goals. What is it that you want them to know or to do? Define measurable objectives. Outline the strategies and tactics you will employ to reach those objectives. And prepare a timeline and budget. Then stick to the plan. And again, write all of this down. Capture it. It doesn't have to be eloquent or elaborate, just clear, concise, and easy to follow. And all of this will greatly improve your chances of a successful campaign and in turn a winning image entry. While starting with a successful campaign is key when preparing a winning image entry, putting it together still takes a significant amount of time. And that brings us to secret number 2. It's going to take a lot longer than you think. Sometimes a dozen or more hours. That sounds ludicrous, but some of these campaigns, especially the full campaigns that you enter, take a lot of time to just write the 2-page summary, refine it, gather the materials, and it really is, it shocks me every time we enter just how long putting an entry together takes. So you're going to want to plan for this. And the way you might do that is to start preparing early, a couple of weeks in advance at a minimum. Obviously, we all have day jobs, and we know our jobs can be wildly unpredictable. So start preparing early so that you don't have to deal with 11th hour type of fire drills. The other thing you can do is block the time on your calendar. Make it a date. Don't know about you, but I am a slave to my calendar. It's actually quite funny. If it's scheduled, I show up. If it's scheduled, I do it. And if you're like me, then it will help you if you go ahead and schedule the time so that you can get your entry done. The third thing that you can consider doing is to divvy up the work. The person most familiar with the campaign, or maybe the person with the best writing ability, should spearhead the 2-page summary. You might put someone else entirely in charge of gathering all of the information to support what's included in that 2-pager. And then you might even put a third person in charge of pulling everything together and physically submitting the entry. I know that depending on the size of your staff, splitting up the work may not be possible, especially if some of you may be, one man, one woman shops. And this is a lot for one person to do. And so that's all the more reason to start early. And lastly, make every effort to submit your entry at least a day early, because you just never know, right? As I mentioned earlier, we work in an incredibly unpredictable profession, and I would argue that technology is just as, if not more so, unpredictable. So avoid the consequences of the unexpected and submit early. There's no harm in doing so, and you'll rest easy knowing that it's done. Oops. So, a winning image entry starts with a successful campaign, and that it's going to take longer than you think. Here's secret number 3. Research isn't just about surveys. Too many people get discouraged from the start when preparing their image entry because they may not have conducted any primary research. We're talking about things like surveys, focus groups, and the like. But that's okay. Primary research is expensive, and many organizations simply don't have the money for it, or frankly aren't willing, unfortunately, to invest in it. That may make your job harder, but I would imagine that you based your campaign and your messaging recommendations on some level of factual information. So your job in this section of your two-page summary and your supporting materials is to provide evidence for these facts and prove that you did not rely on mere assumptions to drive your decisions. Case in point, we didn't do any primary research for the KCCI campaign. Like many organizations, we just didn't have the budget for it. But we did have a good grasp of the situation. We simply had to prove it in our image entry. For example, I mentioned that one of our challenges was the lack of public connection between KCCI and its placemaking projects. People were intimately familiar with KCCI's projects, all of the great things that it had done around town, but they were not necessarily aware that KCCI was the driving force behind them. How did we demonstrate for the judges that this was indeed an issue in our image award, our image entry? We actually reviewed all of the news articles that had been published since KCCI's inception in 2007, and we found a slew of them that featured KCCI's work, but did not mention KCCI even once as being associated with any of the projects. Remember, this had been deliberate on KCCI's part in the past. Part of the reason for its success, again, was because they let others, government, local businesses, nonprofits, and other partners really own the projects and receive the recognition for them rather than standing in the spotlight themselves. But now it created a problem for us, because why would people donate to an organization whose work they weren't really familiar with? So including these articles in our entry showed the judges that we had evidence for what we knew to be true, that this important message had not gotten out through the mass media to the broader community, and therefore a disconnect existed. I tell you this to demonstrate, again, that primary research isn't always necessary to writing a strong situation analysis in your two-page summary and to providing supporting documentation within your image entry. You may have to get creative with it, and that's what we had to do in a lot of cases with this particular campaign and with some of the other image entries we prepared, but that's what we do as PR pros every day, so just get creative with it. We touched a bit on objectives previously. We have covered sort of the first part of your two-pager in terms of research and your situation analysis, so now let's talk about the next part and secret number 4. There's an art to writing strong objectives. First, your objectives must be relevant to the overall goal, not arbitrary. We didn't just randomly decide that we wanted to receive 30 Quality Catalyst applications with the KCCI effort. We knew that the final group of catalysts would total about 12 to 15 people, and we believed that striving to solicit about double that would give us a sufficient pool of qualified applicants to choose from. Not only was that number relevant, it was also realistic, especially considering some of the challenges we faced in terms of lack of awareness and the widespread public assumption that the organization was set to dissolve and therefore no longer recruiting catalysts. So try not to just pull your objectives out of thin air. Make them relevant and also make them realistic. The next thing to remember when writing objectives is to focus on outcomes, not activities. So hold an event is not an objective, it's a strategy. Design a brochure is not an objective, it's a tactic. Think in terms of outcomes. How will you know if that event is successful? By the number of people that attend, perhaps? By the amount of people that sign up for something at the event, maybe? Or how will you know that the brochure worked? By measuring the knowledge people gained or the action people took after they received it? With KCCI, you'll notice that redesigning the website wasn't an objective because it was a strategy used to achieve the broader outcome-oriented objectives. Again, think in terms of outcomes relative to the broader goal. Those are your objectives. And finally, strong objectives are specific and measurable. Most of the time, they should include the target audience. They should describe a specific expectation. They should include measurable criteria, and they should declare a deadline. So you'll see one of our objectives here: to secure a minimum of 30 Quality Catalyst applications from engaged community residents interested in serving in 2015 by the application deadline of November 14th, 2014. Yes, that's a mouthful, but it also contains all four components of a strong objective. It contains the target audience, it contains that specific expectation, the measurable criteria, and then of course the deadline. The next part of your two-page summary and the bulk of your entry revolves around the implementation of your campaign. As such, secret number 5 is the curse of knowledge kills. What I mean by that is you know your campaign like the back of your hand. The judges don't. If you don't make what you did abundantly clear, the judges will get lost in the clutter, potentially becoming confused and even overwhelmed. And that will not bode well for your score. So one way to combat this is to label everything. Submitting entries electronically has made this slightly more difficult than it was in the past. It used to be that when entries were submitted in binders, 3-ring binders, you could easily add tabs and physically label each piece of supporting material. Now, you may need to insert cover sheets between sections of your supporting materials and maybe even add some headers to documents to tell the judges exactly what it is they're looking at. For example, screenshots of before and after photos of a website is pretty obvious, but other items aren't. I mentioned that Tallahassee has the highest number of nonprofit organizations per capita than any other major metro area in Florida. That was an important fact for us to include in our situation analysis section. However, the table that we pulled from the internet wasn't really labeled well, and it was difficult to decipher what you were looking at. So at the top of that chart in our, when we submitted it within our supporting materials, we added a description that explained what it was the judges were looking at. We also labeled the sampling of news articles that I mentioned earlier that demonstrated the disconnect between KCCI and its placemaking projects. Had we not labeled those articles, the judges probably wouldn't have been able to easily discern what they were looking at, let alone why they were included, especially because they didn't once mention the organization's name, KCCI, in them. The easier it is for your judges to follow your supporting materials, the clearer the picture they will have of what you did and how it translated to a successful initiative. So if something within your supporting materials in and of itself is not easily discernible, then make sure you label it. Another way to overcome the curse of knowledge is to have someone who is not at all connected to the campaign review the entry in its entirety, beginning with a 2-page summary. Odds are that if they are confused or unclear about something, the judges will be too and will judge your entry accordingly. So you want to identify and address these points of confusion before your entry reaches the judges. So have someone else look everything over and ask questions. Then refine it and refine it again and have them review it again and refine it again until all of it makes perfect sense to them. Along those same lines, you'll want to be clear about the results you achieved. That brings us to secret number 6. Your level of success might not be obvious. When it comes to the evaluation section of your 2-page summary, don't just rattle off your results and make the judges go back and compare them to your original objectives to figure out how well you did. You're going to want to spoon feed them. Tell them right there the level of success that you achieved. Here's the evaluation section of our 2-page summary for our image entry. Notice in the bold text that we didn't stop after stating the outcome. We made the connection for the judges by explaining how the outcome stacked up against the objective. So at the first one, as of September 1st, 2014, we raised nearly $160,000, thereby exceeding our objective by 7%. Donations continued to roll in through December, ultimately totaling $219,200 and surpassing our objective by 46%. That next one there, surpassing our objective by more than 50%, surpassing our objective by more than, or by 200%, and on and on and on you go. Make sure you highlight just how well you did so it's immediately obvious to the judges. There's one other thing to keep in mind here, and that is not to take this too far when it comes to your supporting materials. It's really tempting in the evaluation section of your support materials and in the other sections of your entry for that matter to give the judges mounds and mounds of evidence to demonstrate the results you achieved, especially if you're entering a highly successful campaign. You can't help but want to tell everything about it, right? But there is such a thing as including too much. I know that may sound counterintuitive, but again, now that entries are submitted electronically, the sheer number of pages in each entry can easily intimidate and overwhelm the judges and downright exhaust them, really. Some of these entries approach 100 pages, if you can believe that, and maybe even exceed them. So one way to keep from overwhelming the judges is to summarize certain aspects of your campaign. For example, if you received 30+ articles on the same topic, instead of including all of them in your submission, consider leading with a publicity report that lists or depicts the headlines of all the news outlets that picked up the story, followed by maybe one or two of the most comprehensive articles. Another idea is if you're entering a campaign that included multiple pieces of print collateral adapted for various mediums, you might just include it in one format. So for example, you may have created a flyer, maybe a palm card, a direct mail card, maybe even a print ad, that all have the same look, feel, and message. However, in order to avoid overwhelming the judges, you might consider only including the most representative or comprehensive print piece in your support materials, something that just gives them the gist of what you did. The takeaway here is that you really want to strike a balance, and you can do that by putting yourself in the judge's shoes and, of course, using a little bit of common sense. And finally, secret number 7. Your budget is about value, not just numbers. Having been a judge for image, which I highly recommend, by the way, there's no better way to learn how to write a successful entry than by sitting on the other side of that table and being a judge. But having been in that role, I've seen far too many companies and organizations completely neglect to give proper consideration for the budget section of their 2-page summary. Judges can read costs and values of time spent on the campaign, and you can have them stare at budget tables and spreadsheets all you want, but none of that tells them anything about why that equates to a worthwhile investment, and that's what you want to do in this section of your entry. Your job here is to justify the cost. Doing so could actually mean the difference between a standard image award and maybe even a best in division, or better yet, the grand all. So how do you do this? Well, one of the ways that you could attempt to do it is to calculate the ROI if at all possible. You'll want to compare the investment to the resulting increase in the organization's bottom line. I know that's not always the easiest thing to do, but if you can do it, definitely do it. You can also quantify any donated services, put a value on them. You could try comparing your costs to industry standards to give the judges some context, some frame of reference. So make sure you're kind of letting them know how your budget measures up. For example, we won an Image Award a year or two ago for a corporate sustainability report that we produced for one of our clients, and we were honestly worried that the judges would assume the budget was too high. So to give them some context, one of the things we included in our budget section was the average dollar amount spent on sustainability reports by other companies in that industry. This showed that our budget was well in line with the industry standard and hopefully dampened some of those assumptions that the judges may have had. And one more thing you could do to justify your budget is to present the campaign costs as a percentage of the company's overall budget. Obviously, the smaller the percentage, the better, especially if your results were significant. So before you present a number like that, make sure it's a good presentation, a good representation of what you did. Here's how we stated the budget for the KCCI campaign in our 2-page summary. Services provided were valued at $41,500. Less $30,000 of in-kind services, KCCI paid only $11,500 out of pocket, which, when considering the $219,200 raise, produced a 1,086% return on investment. So you can see we justified the cost, but still kept it short and sweet. The quantified donated services and the inordinate return on investment were pretty key, I think, in convincing the judges that this was a highly effective and cost-effective campaign. So to recap, start with a successful campaign. It's going to take longer than you think, so be sure to plan ahead. Think beyond surveys when compiling your research and your situation analysis. Write strong objectives. Make them relevant, specific, and measurable. The curse of knowledge kills, so make your entry clear as day. Spoon feed the judges your results. Make sure they know just how successful you were. And finally, give your budget some context. Justify the cost. It's about value, not just numbers. And that concludes the presentation that I have for you. I hope I've given you a bit of insight as you begin to prepare your image entries. As I mentioned, I'd be glad to share the KCCI 2-page summary with anyone who would like a copy. You're welcome to email me, or if you have any other questions even after this presentation, feel free. I'm always happy and excited to bounce around ideas with fellow professionals, and I think it's important that as part of FPRA we're always available to help each other out. So it looks like we do have a little bit of time for questions, so I'm happy to try to answer those for you.
Thank you, Stacy. That was outstanding. Just remind you that you all can use your chat function to send a question to Stacy, or you can click next to your name in the hand column, and that'll raise your hand, and I can open up your mic so that you can ask Stacy your question directly. And as while we're waiting for a question to come in, I would like to, I think you really hit it on the head with all of your 7 secrets after traveling for Golden Image for the last 18 years and watching and judges do their work for Golden Image. Everything that you said couldn't be more true. Particularly curse number 5, the curse of too much knowledge. So you all could take back that piece and write your piece as though that the person knows nothing, because they do know nothing. And I would like to point out at this time, we do have some questions coming in, but Stacy, you did mention that your 2-page summary, I do want to point out that the 2-page, all the winning 2-page summaries are available to members. You can go to fpra.org and go to the Golden Image section. If you go to 2015, the program that that Stacy just shared with us is right there, right at the top. So we do have a question for you, Stacy. Let's see.
Okay.
I'm gonna down. Here we go.
From Courtney?
Yeah. Okay, we have a question from Courtney. She says, if submitting a brochure, can you submit only one item, or would a series of brochures be permitted for entry?
And that, I don't want to answer that, Sheree, because I don't want to claim to be the expert on the guidelines. So do you have feedback there as far as what's allowed?
Yes. If submitting a brochure, you only do need to provide one sample of the brochure, and that will do it. If you have done a variation of the brochure, I'd go ahead and submit the variation as well. Because unlike a program where you're likely to have lots of tools to share when entering in the brochure or printed tools category, that won't be the same. So yes, go ahead and submit the brochure. You only need to do one, and if you have variations, please submit that. We do have another question here from Molly. She says, thank you, Stacy, for the idea to place our budgets in context. I will definitely use that tip. So it's more of a comment than a question. And Lisa.
Good, glad I could help.
Yeah.
That's actually one of the hardest things to do. And we struggle with that a lot, because it's like, oh, well, that's just what they paid for it, or well, this is the time that we spent on it, and we're going to quantify that. But it's really difficult, again, sitting on the other side of the table as a judge to go, well, did you spend $80,000 on this website? You know, I can get a website done for $10,000. You got to really explain to the judges, you know, why you made that investment and why it was cost effective for the client or the organization.
And anything you can do to make the job easier of the judges, as you said, spoon-fed them, is absolutely encouraged. All of the judges are asked to review quite a few entries, and so anything you can do to help them understand your entry better puts you in a better light. I do want to mention here that that Lisa says excellent and thank you. She wants you to know that. We also
Great.
Yes. We also have a question here from Courtney. She says, we created a series of one-page brochures for a client. Can we submit them as one entry, or should each be submitted separately?
And Sheree, again, I think she's just following up to her previous question and maybe seeking some clarification there. And I'm not sure if it was part of a bigger campaign that,
right.
You know, I would assume they can submit them as one entry because it's a variation of they're just variations of the same brochure with the same intent. But I'm going to leave the ultimate.
Yes, you're correct in that, and of course there may be an opportunity, and we do have plenty of members and non-members that will submit in multiple categories because they may want to, they had a broader campaign, but they had a brochure piece. They decided to submit the brochure in the printed portion of the awards competition, but then also submitted it as a program as something larger. It looks like Courtney understands, and she says, thank you, very helpful. I also want to remind you that also in the Golden Image section of fpra.org, you'll find when you go to I believe it's the platform submitting, you'll find a document there, a PDF there that it lists all the divisions and categories with specifics. It does mirror the Image Awards where you can also find that information, which is at fpraimage.org. See if we have any more questions here. Okay, looks like Courtney did have her hand raised, but I'm going to, I think we answered her question. If we haven't, please send a chat and I'll open up your mic.
It looks like she's asking about objectives now, Sheree.
Okay, I'm going to open up your mic. Just please give me a moment. Okay, Courtney, your mic is open. Please ask your question.
Hi, thanks. Sorry for all the questions. But,
oh, that's what we're here for.
About the objectives. When you're, do you recommend explaining how you came up with the objectives so that the judges know they're not just arbitrary, or does that even matter?
I think it depends on how much space you have to work with in your two-page summary. I think if you can, go ahead and do it, but a lot of times you really don't have the space. But the one thing that's important to note is that judges can kind of tell when the objectives are arbitrary, like, you know, let's get 2 news articles published. Well, maybe that's because you have a really small media market that you're targeting. So I would say you can explain them when you feel like the judges may misinterpret it as arbitrary. Does that make sense? Like, yes. If the person that's reviewing your entry goes, oh, well, why did you only want 50 people to attend the event? You know, and just so happens you got 53 people to attend. You know, I think if the judges could misinterpret an objective as something you just wrote in there to show that you achieved something, then go ahead and give it some context. But otherwise, I think most of the time you're okay.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. And I'd like to just add on to that. You did say this in your presentation, Stacy, but in the situation analysis, a lot of that you can set the stage for that, and yeah, and that's a great place to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? Okay. I'm not seeing any at this time. I appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise with us, Stacy, today.
Of course.
It was terrific, and thank you all for joining us. Please take the time to complete your survey at the close of today's session. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.